if there is a problem in the morning, I can upload the recording so everyone can see it. That's the plan anyway. And so good evening, everyone, and welcome to this first meeting of the new school year of Schools Forum. We will be electing the chair and vice chair in just a moment, but I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that we have a few new members. First up, we have Simon Cope and Juanita Dunlop should be joining us. In fact, Simon has just entered and will be joining us any second now. Stuart Bevan is another new member, but he's actually tendered his apologies. We're also expecting 3 observers at the meeting today. Kate Davis and Claire Chandler from the Pines have asked to sit in and observe today. And Steve Barnard from the ESFA will also be there. And I know I saw Steve joined us a few minutes ago. They are purely observing and are not here to ask questions or answer any questions or anything like that. So basically, you can ignore them on the screen. Can I ask that the members of the forum keep your cameras on, because for the chair, it is much easier to see people on the screen. And if the officers can turn the cameras on when they are presenting, the observers, please, if you can keep your cameras off, then that will make it clear that you're not part and parcel of this meeting. Also, Greg Wilton has left his post, and therefore he has no longer a member. And we've also got apologies from Sue Butler. With that, can I ask then if we have any nominations to chair the meeting? I thought this might be a little bit problematic based on previous issues. If there's no one here today who has any enthusiasm for taking on the role of chair, which it looks that way, can I suggest I'm going to defer that and we'll have some more discussions outside the meeting. Do we have any nominations for vice chair? Or is anyone prepared to put themselves forward to vice chair?
I don't mind putting myself forward unless somebody else would like to do it.
It looks, Stuart, like you are the only nominee. So what I would ask for today's meeting is, if you don't mind, please would you chair this meeting, and I will hand over to you, and you might like to invite Simon, I think, who is the only member who is new, just to introduce himself to the rest of the forum, and then it's on with the business.
Okay, thank you very much, Derek. Hello and welcome, Simon. Do you want to just say a couple of bits so we all know who you are?
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Simon Cope was previously head teacher at Wild Ridings for the last 6 years and has just started as a new head teacher of Alsmore Primary School. So here to support the team. So there you go. So thank you very much for the intro, Stuart.
Well, congratulations and welcome. Normally I'd have a great set of notes from Paul to help me through this bit, but because it was the election today, I haven't got my normal set of notes, so apologies as I bumble my way through this. I've also got to leave at 5:30, so either we've got an hour to get things done, or I'm going to have to ask a colleague to help out for the last bit. So I think we've done item 1, apologies, and welcome new members. I don't think there's any substitutes, Joanna?
Not that I've been made aware of.
And are you happy to take attendance from the list on the screen?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, in that case, are there any declarations of interest?
Yeah, Stuart.
Hi, Keith.
Hi, yeah. I think I should declare an interest on item 6, even though it's largely an information item. I'll declare an interest. When we do get to item 6, Chair, I feel I should also point out some factual inaccuracies in the paperwork, just to clarify matters for the members of this committee.
Brilliant, thank you. If we can make a note of that, Joanna, and then yeah, Keith, do do tell us when we get there, please. Okay, matters arising from the last minutes. There was an action on me to follow up our tributes to Martin and write to his wife, and with the help of Paul, we did complete that and sent a letter off before the summer. So thank you very much for people's kind words there. Cheryl, there was an action on you to send the final WSOA to the forum when it's approved. Did that go out?
Thank you, Stuart. It's gone out to every school, every governing body, and it is live on the council website. But Derek, if you'd like a separate copy or a link to that, that can be arranged.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, I think we all certainly received it as head teachers. I'm seeing nods around the table for others. So yeah, thank you very much. There's another action for Cheryl and or Paul, and there was a list of questions that were asked in terms of providing some data about SRPs. Have they been provided in the item that's coming up?
Yes. So the SRP briefing note contains everything that was requested.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
There was another action for Cheryl, but that relates to provide an update on SRPs, which is on the agenda. So we're going to see that today. And unless anybody else can see any matters arising, I don't think there are any further matters arising. Everybody happy that the minutes are accurate? Okay, thank you very much. In that case, we will move on to item 6, which is an update on specialist resource provision. And Cheryl, are you leading on this?
So Nathan Jones has joined us. Nathan has detail. Oh,
hello, Cheryl.
Oh, you're there.
I've made it in, yes, but I'm not very au fait with Zoom, so yeah.
Nathan has drafted the paper, and he is also the officer who has been out to do the research. So Nathan has joined us today to present the paper.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Nathan. I can just see a hand up. Jenny, have you got something?
Yeah, I was just going to give some background information from an earlier discussion with Cheryl at this point, just about the work of the Schools Forum subcommittee leading.
Sorry, Jenny, if we've got mics on, can we turn them off because we're just getting a bit of feedback?
I was just going to give a little brief update about the work of the Schools Forum subcommittee, which is going to lead into Nathan's presentation, if that's okay, in terms of where we were at and how it came about. So the Schools Forum subcommittee has currently got 2 focuses, one being the specialist resource provisions and the second being the banding descriptors. In regards to specialist resource provisions, Stuart and I have met with Nathan Jones and Paul Clark to hear the plans and updates, and these which are being shared at today's meeting. Nathan has also had the opportunity to present to the secondary head teachers on the 16th of September and receive their feedback, as Stuart and I felt that actually we weren't representative as a whole group of head teachers across Bracknell Forest. And an outstanding action is still for Nathan and Paul to meet with the primary head teachers and to share their paper with them. In regards to the banding descriptors, I've met with Liz Savage, who's joined the committee to support the work with the banding descriptors. And currently, and disappointingly, there's been very little progress in moving this forward. However, we know there is a willingness to do so. And who and how this can be moved forward needs to be explored at our next meeting, which is going to be tomorrow. There needs to be further plotting of the model against plans and financial values attached. So from my point of view, in terms of looking after the Schools Forum subcommittee, I'm going to be asking new members of the schools forum if they would like to join the subcommittee to work on those two pieces of work, to support Nathan and to support the local authority, and to work collaboratively to move those work streams forward. So if anybody is interested in either of those two projects, please could you email me and I will add you into our meetings.
Lovely, and thank you very much for looking after those subgroups, Jenny. Okay, so we're going over to Nathan, are we? Thank you.
Hi, Stuart. Is the normal protocol that I share my screen and work through the document with colleagues?
We should all have the document, so we haven't been sharing screens, but whatever's easiest for you, Nathan. If that helps, then please do.
No, that's fine. I'll just run through it. I just wanted to check the norm.
Chair,
Yes, sorry.
before we get stuck into the presentation, can I just point out
Yes.
a couple of things? Firstly, page 14, the RISE there's no formal designation or title known as the RISE. It does not exist. It is Garfield College. RISE at GHC is the name that we give it, and we are situated in North Bracknell and not in Crowthorne and Sandhurst.
Thank you. Nathan, is it you that would make that amendment?
Yeah, I can make that amendment, Stuart, no problem.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks, Keith.
Okay. So Bracknell Forest has seen continued rise in the number of children supported through an education, health and care plan. And within the county, they still only have one special school. This has led to a reliance on the independent sector. In 2021, the decision was taken to develop further SRPs, and 4 new SRPs were created to meet the rising demand across Bracknell Forest within the primary sector. So I was asked to review the SRPs. So as part of that, I visited all primary SRPs bar 1, and the head teacher of that I met via a Teams call. I was due to attend the RISE at GHC, but my understanding that was cancelled late on, and I haven't had an opportunity to do that visit yet, but will do this autumn term. So I also met with parents and carers on 2 occasions, and with the head of SEND and head of early years and advisory teaching service. So I'll quickly move on to my findings. So when visiting school, it transpired that a high proportion of heads and senior staff didn't fully understand the funding mechanism, although I understand that slides have been developed and Paul Clark has done training. There was a rigidity of approach around the expected 50% attendance within the mainstream classroom that created tension. At the time of the SRPs being set up, there was a perception that this 50% attendance allowed the doubling of numbers. So we commissioned 10 places, but with only 50% attendance in the unit, that meant actually 20 children could access that provision. Many head teachers expressed the view that they did not feel that the education landscape in Bracknell Forest were fully aware of SRPs, and schools were unsure of the nature and needs of children that the SRPs could support and how to secure placements. It also did not appear that there was a shared understanding between the local authority and SRPs around the complexity of children that should be accessing the resource provision. And head teachers felt that on occasion they were receiving inappropriate consultations, but this created some tension as LA officers felt that they were. All SRPs voiced concerns around the lack of secondary options for children to transition onto, with some young people still approaching the end of their year 6 term with lack of clarity about where they would be going in year 7. Also, head teachers voiced concern about high level of consultation from other local authorities, and it was felt that for those maintained schools, other local authorities were not always in line with the code of practice consulting Bracknell Forest either. They voiced concern that phased transfer consultations were disconnected and didn't necessarily meant that the best children were placed at the best provider. Schools that hosted an SRP did not receive an increased educational psychology allocation, which created difficult decisions about how they utilised that pressured resource. Schools voiced that they really valued the support from Behavioural Support Service and Autism Advisory Service, but did not feel that it was enough. Head teachers voiced that they were unhappy about some aspects of the service level agreement, which led to some declining signing this document. When meeting with parents, they said they were unclear about the SRPs. They did not know which schools hosted and how to access them. They had a lack of clarity about how each individual SRP would support their child effectively. And SRPs were not well detailed on the local offer. What is important to note, though, is throughout these visits, head teachers and leads were committed to making a real difference to the young children, to the children and young people that were accessing their SRP provision. There's a special note within the document relating to Meadowvale. At the start of my SRP review, Meadowvale took the decision that they no longer wished to host the Rainbow Nursery provision. And this was critical more broadly in that early years have identified a significant increase in the number of young people presenting with complex needs, and we'll touch on that further within the paper. It must also be noted that there were a significant voiced concerns around the utilisation of the Meadowvale speech and language communication provision. So this provision could host 20 children, but in 21-22, they only saw 4 children accessing their provision, and 22-23 at the time of writing the report, they were only expecting 3 children to start with them in September. And I would recommend that more work needs to be done to understand why people are choosing and parents are choosing not to send their children to the Meadowvale Speech and Language Unit, and what is the impact more broadly on the system for those children with speech and language therapy needs who are not accessing the Speech and Language Unit. So my recommendations for the primary sector to address the areas identified through my review was a working group should be set up to review the current funding mechanism with SRP heads to ensure a fundamental understanding across the landscape, to explore the removing of the requirements of children accessing 50% of their lessons within a mainstream classroom and understand what the implications of that removal is, but still retain and remain with an ambition that children should be accessing the mainstream classroom where it's best for that child's particular needs and ability.
Sorry, Nathan, I'm hoping that everybody's read this report. Are there any just particular salient recommendations that you think we particularly need to be aware of? And then perhaps I can ask if members want to ask any questions on primary before we move on to secondary. Is that all right? Are there any significant, which of those recommendations do you think we most need to be aware of?
I mean, reviewing the funding mechanism, obviously with the banding work as well, it's likely to be drawn into that piece of work. Review of the Meadowvale primary SRP, development of secondary provision. Those are probably the key areas coming out of this from my perspective.
Brilliant. So has anybody got any comments or questions on primary recommendations? Roger?
Hi, thanks for your report. I'm just wondering what the demand is versus the number of places that are currently offered, and whether there is sufficient knowledge of the needs of children to be able to answer that currently.
I certainly think from my perspective, I'm doing some work with colleagues in early years, particularly trying to understand the growth within that early years sector, and that will really support us to be able to to be able to predict far more accurately the number of children moving through the system. I think there are a number of factors. We do still have capacity within the system in primary. Certainly for those new providers, they've been keen to staircase their growth rather than grow too quickly to ensure they have that skill and expertise to support those children effectively. And the other school where there is probably the highest level of vacancy is King's Academy. And of course, they're a very new school. And so they're on a growth trajectory. And I would imagine that over time that we would see those filled places being filled. There is scope and available places within the Meadowvale speech and language unit, but I think we need to understand why that is the case, because that has been a long-standing unit. That's my understanding, and they've seen their numbers decline.
So are you telling me that you don't know whether the demand for places are being met at the moment? Do we not have a sophisticated enough knowledge of our children and their needs to indicate that at this time?
I think we have done previous sufficiency work, but it has not been nuanced and captured that effectively. So we are looking at how we can ensure that is the case going forward. And I think bringing in this early years data is going to be really critical to be able to predict far more effectively than we have done. We are due to meet with an organisation that are skilled and experienced in providing this sense sufficiency work for local authorities tomorrow morning to scope how they can support much more effective planning for us to be able to predict places more effectively than we have done historically.
My second question, briefly, if I may, is to just ask about access through families, through parents, and how I think you say in the report that they don't really know how to access, they don't know about the service. How is that going to change?
So as part of the work, and one of my recommendations is a piece of work around that to really clearly define our SRPs, but I've already developed an initial pro forma that will be hosted on individual schools' websites, but also be within the local offer. And I'll work with the Parent Carer Forum to ensure that parents are fully cited as to SRPs and how they can support their children going forward.
So there's quite a long way to go in both those aspects then.
I think that would be fair to say, yeah.
All right, thank you.
I think maybe then, Roger, as an action out of that, we'll probably need, and we're probably going to get an update at the next forum meeting. Anyway, okay, thank you. Anything else on the primary recommendations? Okay, Nathan, do you want to just any significant points on the secondary development?
Yeah, I mean, really, as far as secondary development, I've been looking at data, particularly as to where we've seen the biggest growth. People will see that ASD is our big grower and is an area where we're seeing significant pressure on the high need block, along with SEMH for meeting the needs within the independent sector. My recommendation is that we start with 30 places initially across 2 providers in the secondary sector with a focus on autism and SEMH.
Okay, any questions on secondary? I think my only question so we've got a long list of recommendations. What happens now? Where are those recommendations going? What's the next step?
So I will be picking those up. Obviously, we would have hoped that we would have been through Schools Forum early September. I've already started to pave the way, and we will be cracking on with earnest as soon as we finish Schools Forum. I've already started to discussions with our commissioning department and our Parent Carer Forum as to how they could produce that. And I've already started the work as far as the recommendations as to primary sector.
Okay, so that's underway, and sorry, Paul, you might need to help me here, but as far as the recommendations are concerned, it's just for us to be cited on the findings as opposed to approving anything, so you don't need us to do anything other than to agree that we've had sight. Or Nathan or Cheryl, is that all we need to do?
That is my understanding, Stuart, yes.
Okay, unless anybody dissents, are we able to agree? Go on, Roger.
Sorry, can I just ask whether all the specialisms that you've listed down here are covered through services provided by Bracknell Forest, or are there any that currently mean that children have to go out of authority?
There will always be a small group of young people. So, for example, those young people with a hearing impairment or a visual impairment, we don't have a well-developed, robust specialist provision for those children, but they are a relatively small cohort within that. So, yeah, I mean, I think we do pretty much have them covered.
Okay, are there any other comments on this? Gone. In that case, thank you very much. We have had sight of these findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks, Nathan. And I know a lot of work's been going on, and as Forum, we've been asking for work in that area. So thank you for everything you're doing. Where are we going now? Delivering better value in SEN. Is this you, Paul?
Yes, it is, Stuart, if that's all right.
Hand straight over, yeah.
Thank you. Okay, evening, everybody. This is an information report, so it's not seeking any particular recommendations, but obviously welcome any comments, suggestions at the end if there are any. Mainly it's to introduce you to a new development programme that the DfE have initiated, and we're part of that group of local authorities that will benefit from it, and also to give you one or two updates on other aspects of high needs funding that is appropriate just to slot in on this information update as well. So this is the Delivering Better Value in SEND programme. And it's aimed to support local authorities to develop improved SEN services, but also make sure they are financially sustainable as well. So it will be dedicated towards 55 local authorities, and those local authorities have been selected with those with the highest deficit balances at the end of 2021. Obviously, we fall into that category, and I think that won't be a surprise to anyone here. And the actual programme itself has been delivered through a group of consultants that the DfE have commissioned. So there will be a mixture of specialist transformational change public sector organisation group called Newton, and a public sector finance organisation called SIPFA Accountancy. So there'll be a blend of finance and actual transformational work within that. And the approach they're taking is to be very much outcomes focused, evidence driven. So there's a lot of data being collected, analysed and used to put forward recommendations for outcomes. And it's also going to be a co-production effort as well. So it will involve schools and parent care forum, etc., as we go through this process. So, as I said, we're in the first tranche of local authorities. So there's 3 tranches of this, the 55. So we're in the first block of 20. That work has now started. So we've had some initial engagement with the group, and we're actually going through a diagnostic process at the moment, and where our plans, our data and identification of the drivers for the financial position that we're in at the moment. I think we've already done a lot of work of that ourselves, but it'll be drawing on that and bringing that together through this particular piece of work as well. The idea is to produce an improvement plan, and also a way of having a DSG, a dedicated schools grant recovery plan as well. So at the end of this piece of work, what the expectation is, well, that the plan is that each local authority can then put forward a bid to the DfE to secure some extra funding to implement your action plan. That piece of work will take place for the rest of this calendar year. And then we should be in a position to put a bid forward. And there's around, well, depending on different sets of information, it's between 60 and 85 million pounds is available for these 55 local authorities in the programme to secure some money to put in place their action plan. So obviously it's important we get a good bid together to maximise our chance for that. And then these plans are expected to run for 18 months. So there's a bit more information on the plan at Annex 1 if you want to have a look at that. That shows particularly what the diagnostics process involved, some of the resourcing requirements, and also an initial timeline of events. So where we are right now is that we're at this stage where we're gathering together a wide data set for each of our children with a education healthcare plan. So around 1,300 children. There's about 42 columns of data that's being collected for that. So as you can imagine, it's a huge amount of work. So that's the current numbers, but the plan is also to give them that data for every child with an HCP in the last 5 years. So that's going to get to be a bigger cohort than we have right now. And the first real step towards doing that is that there's 3 sets of training set up for groups of local authority officers. So the other ones that are in this group, we will be going on these training sessions together, and we've got one next week for a couple of days where we'll be looking at actually going through the data, checking those sort of things, and actually getting involved with how this program actually works in terms of a process point of view as well. So we're pleased to be in the program. Hopefully we'll get some good advice and make sure we've got a really good set of data as well at the end of this, and a robust action plan. And then hopefully that'll help us on the journey that we've already started on all these other parts of change we're looking at. So I don't know if I stop there. Are there any sort of questions or points on the Delivering Better Value program?
I think I saw Keith's hand.
Yeah, no, thank you. I was looking at the timeline. I might be racing ahead, Paul, if you want me to come back with this question.
No, I mean, it's fine to take any questions on the Delivering Better Value program before I go on to the other bits of information.
Well, my general question is, do you see there are any risks to this timeline?
Yeah, there's a lot of data to pull together. I think we've made very good progress, and I think it's going to be very good from our point of view to get together a really good set of data and something that we can then maintain going forward. So there's always risks in collecting data. I mean, I said there's 42 fields of data they're requesting. We know we can't provide all of that. They know we can't provide all of that. So we'll be focusing on the key areas that we agree between ourselves that will help with this particular piece of work. So yeah, and I think when we go to this course next week, I think we'll find out exactly how we fit in and where we lie with other local authorities as well, because I can't imagine any local authorities can be able to provide all the information that they're requesting. And, you know, we've got some big county councils involved in this as well, so they'll have thousands and thousands of children to provide all that data on. So yeah, there's a risk around getting all that data together, but we have made good progress. I think we're confident that we're going on the right path on this. And as I say, we'll find out a lot more next week as to just how far we still have to go on that. But we're as confident as we can be at the moment. But I think a program of this size, it's a very quick-paced program as well. Fitting in with all our other work commitments as well is it's going to be a challenge. I think it's one of the things we're going to prioritize, definitely.
Any other questions? Paul, I guess my only comment is this is good news that we're in the first tranche. Hard work, but we might have access to some additional support and funding. Yeah, my initial thought was that, but then thinking about it, I think we found that we're in the guinea pig group as well. So a number of things that have come out, and where they've been asking them for us for information, etc. There's been feedback that some of that's not practical, so there have been changes in some of the layouts and what's been asked for as well. But I mean, overall, to be in the program, I think is very good news for us, because we should get some more money out of it. We should get a really good data set of information, and we should get verification of the sort of roadmap we should be going on, the things we should be looking at, which I'm sure will just confirm what we've already been working towards at the moment. But I think it'll be good to get these external experts to confirm that as well. Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this? Okay, I can't see any hands. So Paul, we don't need to do anything. That's just an information. No, there's just a couple of other bits on the paper that I don't mind picking up, if that's okay. Again, information it's just to give you an update of where we are. I mean, the other thing is also the reminder there's this statutory override on the responsibility for paying off the debt on the High East block budget. So you'll know we've got a fairly substantial deficit. At the moment, it's not needing to be covered from the council's reserves at the moment, but that is scheduled to end at the end of this financial year, so March 23. There's a lot of concern in local authorities about this. There's some information and data collection being done in government departments to see what impact that could have across the local authority infrastructure, not just in education, but across all of the services that local authorities provide, because those will all have to
come to a way of supporting these debts if they transfer back to local authorities. So if that does occur, we'll have a debt of around £18 million on current forecast that comes onto our accounts, and we'll have to have a recovery plan for that as well. So that's a big challenge and a huge risk for the local authority. So we need to keep an eye on that. But at the moment, the DfE is still saying that you need to plan to assume that that liability will transfer back to you. So just a reminder that there's that in the background as well, and I guess we'll get some more information on that towards the end of the year, start of the next financial year, start of next year, I mean. And there's also a bit of information towards the end of that report on the financial settlement that we have for next year. So this is the change in funding, the increase in funding that the DfE have announced for next year. So overall funding in high needs is going up 6.3%, and there's ranges between 5 and 7% by local authority, and our increase is 5%. So that's still, relatively speaking, disregard costs at the moment, that's quite a large increase in income. And the other part that we put on that paper is also to try and just give you a very brief kind of 3 or 4 bullet points at the end there about our plan for bringing information towards you in a timely manner, so you have a good set of information and a chance to contribute, comment, and steer how we pull the budget together next year. So there's some information on that towards the end of the report as well. So it's just a case of sort of hopefully giving you a bit of a reassurance of what we're doing there. So yeah, so that was it. All that paper was a bit of an update. One is a new program, and others just a couple of other bits and pieces that you're probably familiar with, but just to keep them in focus, really. So I don't know if anyone else has any other questions on those parts of the report.
No.
No.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next item, Paul. Back to you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, so thank you. So this is an annual report on bringing together requests for financial arrangements for additional support to schools. So this is for the current financial year, and it's basically looking to see what support can we give to schools that in effect need a loan to see them through a short period of sort of a cash flow situation where they don't have enough money to meet all their current expenditure now, but we don't want the school to have to take significant changes to their budget plan if there's a medium-term approach that we can use that can adopt a more reserved approach and a more measured approach to that. So I mean, in terms of what's in the report, I'll probably just focus on the executive summary, and it is very good news in terms of how that the level of deficits is changing. So they have reduced in aggregate from the levels we had last year, and even the amounts that we were anticipating at the end of 22-23 when we looked at this last year. We was expecting £685,000 of outstanding deficits. That's reduced by £190,000 to £495,000. So that's a big increase, and that a big reduction, and that's through the work we've done with those schools during the course of the year, revising those plans and updating them as appropriate. So that's all what we've done with schools. So it's an agreed plan, and that deficit level is less than 1% of annual school budgets, and that's by far the lowest amount we've had for a long time. So some members here will remember not so long back we were really struggling with deficits, and how could we manage to support the level of deficits that were coming forward. So obviously schools done a great job on managing those and getting much better financial positions. So that's really pleasing news. There wasn't any new requests for licenses this financial year again, so that's another good sign that no other schools are in a position where they need to come for us for a loan type arrangement. And we have 4 deficits in place now. That's all. 3 of them were fully repaid during the last financial year, so that's good. The only thing to keep an eye on, I think, at the moment is there are 2 schools at the moment where we are struggling to get a recovery plan in place. So we haven't got a full plan in place that shows that the deficit will be repaid at a certain point in time. We have plans with the schools that are showing reductions in their deficit, but they're not in a position yet that we can say in 2, 3, 4 years' time that will be fully repaid. And at the moment, we've got about £150,000 of debt exposed in that way. But as I say, having part of the process is to have regular meetings, reviews with the schools involved, and that they are progressing. But I think if you see in the paper, both those schools are 1-form entry schools. So obviously they're very small in relatively speaking, and they're the type of schools that have much more difficulties to generate cost reductions through economies of scale. And it's often the case that if you get one or two classes that are quite small in numbers, it takes a long while for that to roll through the school and before you start getting a good level of income again. Both those schools seem to be taking in full admissions as well now, so hopefully over time they will be in a much better position. But right now they're not close enough for us to be able to identify fully repaid deficits in the current time span that we're looking at. So the only other thing I'd like to say on this is that you may also have seen in the report, those of you that have been on the forum for quite a while will know that East Hampstead Park has had a financial a deficit for many years now, going back to 2016, and it was quite a substantial one at one stage, and it's really pleasing to see that deficit has been fully paid off as well now, and that school's moved to a surplus. So there's been a lot of hard work, a lot of good work at that school over a sustained period of time. So I'm very pleased that that's happened. So I'd like to raise that one and highlight that particular success story as well there. Okay, that's that on that. Thank you very much. I don't think there's anything else I need to add.
Any questions or comments? Keith?
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. My question, looking ahead, in all likelihood, unless something dramatic is going to happen, which is certainly not known at this stage, it could have many more schools falling into this bracket and requiring your support and attention. So with that in mind, I just wanted to ask, is anything being done behind the scenes to start preparing for that eventuality? And by that, I'm not talking about you and your team per se, Paul, because I know, and I speak from experience, the support that you provide is superb. But we could be in a situation where there's a big pool on your resource, and capacity might be an issue, but it's also thinking about making the most of the experience of those schools who've been through this as well. Yeah,
I mean, we touch on this a bit again on the next paper as well, where we talk about next year's budget. But yeah, I mean, the future is looking completely different to what we've seen in this particular paper and what we saw a couple of months back with the school balances, where they had improved as well. So, but we're moving very much into a position where, on all the information we have at the moment, there's going to be a significant gap between increases in income and the increases in costs. And that is undoubtedly going to cause some real big challenges for some schools. Yeah, I mean, you're right. I think this is going to be a difficulty across the whole of the public sector. So it's something that we as a council are facing significantly as well. There'll be instances where some schools will have some balances to help them for a small while. Some schools will, not all schools. I think it's a watching brief for now. I haven't got any answers. I mean, that was what I was going to say on the next paper, really. There's no indication that there'll be any extra funding from the government. Obviously, there's been quite a lot of change in the government recently in terms of leadership, etc. And the whole cost of living crisis is something that's emerged over the last 5 or 6 months. So we don't know if there are any plans. And I think at the moment we're having to go ahead on the worst case scenario that there is no extra money. But there's really little that we can say or do to support you other than, offer our support and advice. And we may, I'm sure we'll be in a position where far more schools come forward with deficits through this process than possibly we've ever had before. But the other thing is, I don't really want to panic too much just yet. I think everyone needs to be aware of it. If there are opportunities to take some advantages of some cost reductions or something, I think they've got to be looked at really carefully if any of those sort of things come along. If you have some changes in staff, are there anything that you can do there? But yeah, right now it's looking very, very difficult for next year for all schools. As I say, I have no answers right now. I think we'll need to see if anything else emerges through the rest of this term. But I'm not expecting to be able to come up with a load of answers on that, I'm afraid.
Nick, you got your hand up?
Yeah, I mean, I think Keith beat me to it, actually. I was going to ask basically the same question in terms of, are we going to have any extra provision, or what we're doing to have any extra provision and fundings like this? Because cost of living, etc., I think this is just going to be a generic problem across the sector, unfortunately. So
yeah, I can't disagree with you. Unfortunately, as I say, I just haven't got any good news in terms of that. Yes, there's this, we're expecting this announcement, there's this grant coming, or the council's got this amount of money that it can help schools with. We're not got any certainty on any of that. So as I say, I think we just got to wait and see that if something does emerge, then obviously that'll be really good. But there's no news on that yet. There's obviously just no answer, and it's an issue that's going to crop up right across the country, across schools and the whole of the public sector.
I think probably the next item we've got the doom and gloom of looking at next year, but for this item, I guess this is good news, and our thanks to the finance team and the individual schools for turning things around. So thank you to you as well, Paul, and your team. If we go to unless anybody else has got anything else, we'll move to the recommendations. And if we can do this, if you disagree, if you can raise your hand or speak up. So recommendations are on page 35, and we've got recommendation 3.1, subject to school governors confirming the relevant financing schedule and compliance. We are agreeing to points A and B. Any dissent? Okay, so we agree to that. And then 3.2, we are noting that the following schools have repaid their licence deficits: Sandhurst, Humswater and East Hampton Park. So that is noted, and thank you very much. Okay, guess what, Paul?
Yeah,
again.
Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
very much, Stuart. Yeah, so this is an annual paper, but there are some more decisions around just agreeing a few bits and pieces on this. Again, there's a lot of information in here setting the scene, and I think what I'd just like to do is just go through a few bullet points. As I say, there's a lot in there. Happy to take any questions at the end, but we're very early in the process, as we'd all know. So in terms of what's going to happen next year that we're aware of, I think everyone will know that the government has been pressing for a long while now to introduce a national funding formula so that every school gets the same use the same data set, same units of resource to fund them for the pupils on roll, irrespective of where you are in the country. And that's been an aim for a number of years now. And 23-24 will be the first year where the DFE will actually be mandating local authorities to move closer to the national funding formula that they want to implement. And you have to move at least 10% closer than where you are now in next financial year. But if you're already within 2.5% of the national funding formula, then you're considered close enough not to have to change your current course of action. So Bracknell Forest is actually within 0.25% of the national funding formula, replicating that in the current year. So I don't anticipate us having any issues with complying with that, and that's a strategy that we've adopted here for a number of years now, recognising this national funding formula is coming. We were going to try and get our formula close to that as possible, so that we're close to that when it happens. The other thing is that the school supplementary grant, so that was a grant you got this year to cover the additional health and social care levy that came in, and some of the other cost pressures that weren't included in the budget settlement for 22-23. There was a one-off grant. All that money is staying in the system, but rather than paying that through a separate grant, you'll get that through the national funding formula rates next year. So there will be some slight differences between how that grant's allocated at the moment and through the national funding formula. But the aim of the transition from one funding stream to the other is to protect the allocation to each school as closely as possibly can be done. In terms of the funding increase, again, this is where we talk about the difficulties we were just mentioning on the last item. The average year-on-year increase is a 1.9% in the budget for schools next year, and this is where I was going to highlight the issues around the differences between the funding settlement and the costs that they are now. So cost now, inflation, the consumer price index is 9.9%. That's a 1.9%. It's been above 9% for 5 months now, the rate of inflation. Recall that's obviously there's a huge problem there. And again, I was going to say, I think we talked about that on the last item, but it's a real challenge for everyone involved in setting budgets next year. And there is no immediate indication that there'll be any extra funding to help with this, but we need to keep an eye on things as they go through the rest of the year. Got my pages right now. Okay. Also to confirm that I think you'll all know, most of you will know that there's two funding mechanisms in the system at the moment. One that guarantees a minimum cash per pupil amount of funding each year, and a second one that guarantees a minimum increase in per pupil funding from the last financial year. Both of those will still be in place next year, but in terms of recognising the level of the financial settlement, the minimum increase that you can receive in a school's budget next year is going to be 0.5%. Whereas in previous years, it's been up to 2%. So there's a big reduction. So schools can have smaller increases next year compared to their current year's funding than were permitted in previous years. I think there's also some of the central education services that are included in the dedicated schools grants. So some of the things like we had some budgets on historic commitments to support some of the vulnerable children around education for looked after children. Some of the English as additional language services, those funding grants are going to be cut again next year by 20%. So that's another £40,000 reduction in those levels of services. And we're doing our usual financial consultation at the moment around for maintained schools. Do you still want to do dedelegation, and do you still want to contribute to some of the statutory responsibilities that the local authority still needs to meet for education but doesn't receive any funding for? And for all schools, academies and maintained schools, we're asking, well, what do you want to be the minimum level of increase between 2022 and 23 and 23-24? So as I said, we usually do the maximum increase, so we're asking, do you support a 0.5% minimum increase next year as well? So that's a consultation that's out at the moment, and we'll report back the answers to that at the next meeting of the forum. And then there's only one other thing that I want to highlight from the report, really, is that again, people that have been on the forum for a while will know that we've had a huge cost pressure over the years about supporting new schools, where we've tried to do that through a measured approach rather than opening schools year by year rather than all year groups in one go. That would probably have a more significant impact on local schools than if we do it in this measured way. That has required some additional diseconomy funding. Now we've got to the stage where King's Academy Group, Binfield Secondary School, has now opened to all year groups, so they won't be getting any diseconomy top-up funding next financial year, and that will result in a one-off saving of around £700,000. So that will be more money into the system in next year's budget than we would otherwise have. That's just for 1 year, because the funding, a lot of the funding for that comes through on a lag basis. So our funding for increased pupil numbers will come down through the DSG the following year. So it's a one-off funding only. We still get the high increase of funding this year, and the low cost next year. We'll get the lower increase in income and the lower cost. So it's a 1 year bonus, as it were. So as I say, yeah, that's where we are at the moment. All the information in the paper is based on our current data, which is October 21. So it'll all be subject to update and review when the October 22 census is confirmed, and we'll get that confirmation towards the end of the calendar year. And at the moment, we're mainly because of the reduction in diseconomy funding to King's Academy Binfield Secondary School, we've got a very short indicative shortfall in funding for next year of around £100,000. It's normally sort of £500,000 or £600,000 that we're looking at this stage. So we're very close to being able to achieve the national funding formula rates without having to look at too many more changes to the budget. And what we would do is we would fund it if there remains a gap at the end of the budget setting process. We'd either fund that from drawing down some reserves, there's some earmarked reserves to help with the balance in the budget, or we can we can fund schools that are slightly below the national funding formula level rate, or we can combine both of those two together. So we don't need to think about that yet, but that will be the way that we would balance the budget if there's still a deficit when we come to making the final budget decisions. So we'll be publishing, as per usual, indicative individual school budgets in January, once we have a clear idea of what the final data is, and a view that the schools forum are supporting the proposals that we bring at that point in time. And then the final budgets will be confirmed in March. So that's the timeline for that, and that's the same as normal. So there's quite a lot of information in there, but I just wanted to draw out those points. But I'm happy to take any questions or comments if there are any.
Paul, I don't know whether it's appropriate or within our powers, but if other members agree, can we note our severe concerns at this national increase of 1.9%, because it's going to be very difficult to fund any staffing increase, let alone inflationary and energy increase. 1.9% is dangerous. That's a level which will cause severe cuts, and I don't know whether we can ask our politicians, maybe Gareth, to express that on behalf of the council.
Absolutely,
very worrying.
Absolutely. We're on it at the moment. There are a range of issues in that, and particularly for the range of provision we've been talking about today. So absolutely on that at the moment. We'll be meeting with the MP to make that point tomorrow.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, is there anything you want to formally minute on that, Stuart, or was that was the...
Are you happy for us to minute that, Gareth, that the forum have expressed significant concerns and have asked you to raise that with the MP? I'm assuming that's a yes from Gareth. Okay, and unless there's any dissent to that view, I think we've agreed that that's Gareth's action. Okay, any other
You're so kind.
Thank you. Any other questions for Paul on that? I know we covered some of it before, but anybody else would like to raise a question? Okay, I can't see anybody. In that case, we're on page 48, and we've got some recommendations to agree. Again, if there's any dissent, please put your hand up or speak up. So we've got 3.1, subject to consideration of the responses to the consultation. The approach to budget setting should remain broadly the same, and you've got points 1, 2, 3, and 4. Any disagreement? Nope. Okay, so we agree to 3.1. 3.2, the proposed clarifications to the Startup and Diseconomy funding policy and expanding schools. Any dissent to that? Okay, so that is agreed. And then we've got to note 3.3 and 3.4, which is noted. Is there any other business? Everybody's very quiet. In that case, next meeting is 4:30 on the 17th of November. And I think we're done. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart, and good night. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.